No one can explain how the giant gray dog appeared unscathed in the lobby of Macy's Children's Hospital in a snowstorm of -15 degrees below zero. On this December night in the suburbs of Boston, a blizzard raged like the end of the world. White walls of snow cut off everything from the outside world, and the snow in the hospital parking lot had already reached the tires of the cars, leaving only the vague outlines of the vehicles of a few medical staff on night shifts. Just after midnight, the whistling wind cut a sharp wail on the glass facade of the hospital, like the whisper of some supernatural creature. On such a snowy night when it is impossible for any creatures to cross it, surveillance cameras captured a blurry gray shadow appearing in front of the automatic door of the hospital. There were no footprints, no warning, and the automatic doors inexplicably opened, as if to welcome an invisible visitor. Mike Donovan, the security guard on duty, rubbed his tired eyes, thinking he was hallucinating. But when he opened his eyes again, the striking gray canine did stand silently in the center of the hall, the light of the crystal chandelier casting a mysterious halo on it. It was an Irish wolfhound with a noble posture and an unusual temperament. The most puzzling thing is that there is not a single snowflake or water stain on its long gray hair, as if it has never experienced a hellish snowstorm outside. "Hey, where are you from, big guy?" Mike stood up and hesitantly walked towards the mysterious dog. The wolfhound, later known as Apollo, just glanced at the security guard calmly, its green eyes deep and full of intelligence, hardly like what an animal should look like. Mike felt a strange chill creeping up his spine, not of fear, but of some kind of awe, as if he was facing something far beyond his comprehension. Without hesitation, Apollo turned around and walked towards the interior of the hospital, its movements graceful and firm, as if he knew his destination by heart. What's even stranger is that Mike finds himself unable to stop it, or even shout. He could only watch as Apollo's figure disappeared into the hallway, as if prevented from action by some invisible force. When Apollo's figure disappeared completely, Mike regained his mobility. He immediately picked up the walkie-talkie to report the anomaly, but stopped when the words came to his lips. He had a vague sense that this mysterious creature was not a threat, but had come with some kind of mission. Eventually, he put down the walkie-talkie and decided to remain silent for a moment, as if guided by some kind of silent guidance. The blizzard outside became even more violent, and the world outside the window turned into pure white chaos. And in the depths of the hospital, a miracle that surpasses scientific explanation is quietly beginning. Apollo's claws barely made a sound on the tiled floor of the hospital, silently moving forward like a ghost. It walked through the dark hallways and past the nurses' station, and none of the night nurses noticed its presence, as if it was free to choose when it would be noticed by humans. The red dot on the surveillance camera flickered as it passed, then returned to normal, recording only the empty hallway. The late-night silence of the hospital was shattered by the occasional regular beep of medical equipment and the whispers of nurses in the distance. Apollo seemed to be oblivious to all of this, its green eyes staring intently ahead, as if being pulled by some invisible guide. Without hesitation, it walked to the elevator room, as if it already knew every corner of the building. The elevator doors opened silently, and no button was pressed, as if to welcome the uninvited guest. Apollo walked into the elevator and gently touched the buttons on the control panel with his nose. The elevator lights up, indicating that it is ascending to the 5th floor, where the Pediatric Oncology Intensive Care Unit is located. "This can't be," muttered the technician in the elevator monitoring room, who watched the empty elevator on the screen run automatically, but did not have the courage to report the anomaly. Some unexplained force seemed to make him choose silence. The door to the intensive care unit requires an electronic access card to open, which is one of the most tightly controlled areas of the hospital. However, as Apollo approached, the door lock made a slight, drip sound, the red light of the security system turned green, and the door slid open silently, as if the entire hospital was cooperating with the mysterious visitor's mission. In the ward, the lights of the blue monitoring equipment flickered, and various instruments emitted regular humming and ticking sounds, forming a symphony of fragile life. The smell of disinfectant was in the air, the clock on the wall showed that it was 1:17 a.m., and the blizzard was still raging outside the window, and the snowflakes were beating against the windows like messengers from another world. Apollo walked straight to a hospital bed in the corner, without the slightest hesitation, as if it had come all the way for this moment. On the bed lay a skinny figure, 4-year-old Sophia Williams, a child with advanced leukemia. Her curly blonde hair was running out from chemotherapy, her pale cheeks were covered with oxygen masks, and her slender arms were filled with tubes and needles. On her bedside table is a worn-out stuffed bunny, Hope, her only playmate and her last connection to her normal childhood. Apollo gently walked to the bedside and carefully rested his head on the edge of the bed. Its green eyes stared intently at the little girl, as if in some kind of silent communication or assessment. Sophia moved slightly in her sleep, her breathing becoming a little smoother, and the numbers on the monitoring instrument fluctuated almost imperceptibly. Her fingers stretched out involuntarily and landed on top of Apollo's head. At that moment, on a tree outside the window of the ward, a cardinal, despite the raging snowstorm, suddenly landed on the windowsill, its bright red feathers stood out against the snowy background. It tilted its head to look at Apollo and Sophia in the room, as if witnessing the beginning of some kind of ritual. A few seconds later, it flapped its wings and flew away, disappearing into the snowstorm. Apollo's eyes flickered slightly, as if he understood the cardinal's presence. It exhaled softly, a warm breath brushing through Sophia's fingers. At that moment, the heart rate line on the monitoring instrument became more powerful, as if the flame of life had been gently lit up. A miracle that crosses the boundaries of science and faith is quietly unfolding on this snowstorm night. Dr. Amelia Brown pushed open the office door and rubbed her tired eyes, the coffee in her hand already cold. As the chief physician in the pediatric ICU, she had just finished an emergency operation that lasted 4 hours to save a 10-year-old boy injured in a car accident. It's 3 o'clock in the morning, and she just wants to check on Sophia and go to the lounge for a nap. 38-year-old Amelia has short dark brown hair and determined blue eyes, and her 10 years of experience in war zones have made her one of the calmest doctors in the hospital, and her colleagues call her the Snow Queen, not because of her coldness, but because of her ability to keep her cool judgment in the most critical situations. However, Sophia's case left her feeling powerless than ever before. All conventional and experimental treatment options had been tried, but the little girl's condition was still deteriorating. Just yesterday, she had to tell Sophia's parents that their daughter may only have 2 weeks left. The young couple's devastating expression still haunts her mind as one of the most painful memories of her career. "There's always a limit to science," she said to herself, a painful lesson she learned while serving in a war zone hospital in Afghanistan. Sometimes, all the medical knowledge and advanced equipment can't save a life, especially a small life like Sophia. When she pushed open the door to the intensive care unit, the sight made her freeze in place, and the medical record board in her hand almost fell to the floor. A large gray canine was lying on Sophia's bedside, its head resting gently on the little girl's arm. The lights in the room were dimmed, but the green eyes shimmered strangely in the darkness and looked straight at her. "What's going on?" Amelia muttered to herself, and immediately went into a state of alert. The appearance of an animal in a highly sterile intensive care unit is a medical disaster. She should have immediately pressed the alarm button and called in security to take the animal away. Her hand was already on the wall for the emergency call button. However, when Apollo turned his head and those green eyes met hers, Amelia felt a strange calm suddenly envelop her. They weren't ordinary animal eyes. They contained some kind of deep understanding and wisdom, almost like a window to an ancient soul. Even more surprisingly, Sophia's monitoring instruments showed that the little girl's vital signs were more stable than in previous days, her heart rate was more regular, and her blood oxygen levels had also increased slightly. Amelia slowly lowered her hand, medical training and intuition at war within her. As a scientist, she knew that the animal should be removed immediately. But as a doctor who has seen too many unexplained phenomena, she can't ignore the subtle improvement in Sophia's condition. "How did you get in?" She asked softly, knowing that she wouldn't get an answer, but she couldn't help but ask. Apollo just looked at her calmly, neither scared nor nervous, as if it had every right to stay here. Amelia cautiously approached and looked at Sophia's indicators. To her surprise, the little girl's complexion was much better than the day before, and her breathing was more steady. She gently checked Sophia's pulse, then hesitantly reached out to touch Apollo's head. Apollo did not dodge, but leaned gently into her hand, as if confirming some kind of silent connection. Amelia felt a strange warm current ripple through her body from the point of contact, a feeling that was both familiar and strange, reminding her of her childhood at the warm fireplace of her grandmother's house. She remembered the little patient she had lost in the war zone, an Afghan girl about Sophia's age, who had stopped breathing in her arms despite her best efforts. That night, a stray dog appeared outside the hospital and stood guard at the entrance of the hospital all night, as if keeping vigil for the soul of the dead. The next morning, the dog mysteriously disappeared just as it had appeared when it appeared. "I must be too tired," she muttered to herself, before making a decision that defied all medical protocols, just wait and see. She checked the room's surveillance camera and found that it appeared to be on standby and was not recording any footage. This should have made her more vigilant, but for some reason, she felt an inexplicable sense of relief. She quietly exited the room and gently closed the door, deciding not to alarm anyone for a while. In the hallway, she meets Nurse Jackson, who is on patrol. "Dr. Brown, you look like you've seen a ghost," Jackson said with concern. "Are you all right?" Amelia hesitated, almost telling him about Apollo, but some instinct stopped her. "I'm fine, I'm just too tired," she replied, "and Sophia's condition seems to be a little more stable." "Really? That's good news," Jackson said with a smile. "Maybe the Christmas miracle came early." Amelia smiled reluctantly. Maybe. She is not a person who believes in miracles, at least not before Afghanistan. But now, faced with an unexplained phenomenon, she finds herself shaking in her scientific beliefs. Back in the office, she couldn't sleep. She turned on her computer and began to search through the research literature on animal treatment, and, on the spur of the moment, myths and legends about the Irish wolfhound. The text on the screen faded into obscurity, and an old Irish legend caught her eye. The dog was said to be seen in Celtic mythology as a guide to the next world, sometimes appearing as a guardian for those who lived and died. Ridiculous, Amelia shook her head, closing her browser. She is a scientist, not a superstitious person. However, when she finally closes her eyes on the couch in her office, she dreams of green eyes and cardinals in the snow, as well as a vague voice that seems to say, "There are things that science can't explain, Doctor." Outside the window, the blizzard is finally starting to abate, and the first rays of morning light are trying to penetrate the heavy clouds. And in Sophia's hospital room, Apollo still guarded, as if time meant nothing to it. A battle between science and faith has begun, and Dr. Amelia Brown finds herself at the center of it. At 7 o'clock in the morning, the hospital began to wake up. The blizzard outside had stopped, and the sunlight shone through the windows into the hallway, staining the floor a warm gold. Dr. Amelia woke up from her short slumber and immediately remembered the uninvited guest she had been the night before. She hurriedly straightened herself up and rushed to Sophia's hospital room, filled with conflicting emotions, both fear that the mysterious dog had disappeared and fear that it was really still there, proving that last night's experience was not a hallucination of her tired brain. When she pushed open the door to the hospital room, Apollo was still there, as if he hadn't moved all night. It looked up, its green eyes staring at her calmly, without any surprise or wariness. Even more shocking is that Sophia, the little girl who was dying yesterday, is now sitting on the bed, her little hands gently caressing Apollo's gray fur with a faint but real smile on her face. "Hello, Dr. Brown," Sophia's voice, though faint, was clearer than at any time in the past few weeks. "Look, I have a friend." He said his name was Apollo. Amelia felt a wave of vertigo. Sophia hadn't spoken such a long sentence in 2 weeks, let alone sat up or smiled. She walked briskly to the bedside, picked up the medical record board to examine the monitoring data, and couldn't believe her eyes. Sophia's vital signs showed a marked improvement. Her white blood cell count had almost returned to the normal range, and her temperature had stabilized. "Sophia, how are you feeling?" Amelia asked, professionally examining the little girl's pupil reactions. "I'm hungry," Sophia replied, a simple answer that almost brought Amelia to tears. The return of appetite is an extremely positive sign, especially for a chemotherapy patient. "How did Apollo come about?" Amelia asked cautiously as she gave Sophia a routine checkup. "He came to see me last night," Sophia replied simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, "and he said he would help me get better." Amelia felt a chill creep up her spine. Sophia talks about Apollo in a way that makes it as if it were not just an animal, but a being capable of communicating. She looked at Apollo, who was calmly looking back at her, his green eyes that seemed to contain some kind of silent challenge. "I need to do some checkups for you," Amelia said to Sophia, then hesitantly added, "Apollo can stay here if you want." Sophia nodded, her little hand still resting on Apollo's head, as if drawing strength from it. Amelia quickly drew a blood sample and arranged for a series of emergency tests. As she left the hospital room, a disturbing thought came to mind. If Sophia did begin to recover, how would she explain to the medical community the connection between a mysteriously appearing dog and the incident? More importantly, should she do it? In her office, Amelia stared at the blood test results she had just gotten her hands on, barely believing her eyes. Sophia's number of leukemia cells dropped significantly, almost by 40%, which is medically impossible. No known treatment has such dramatic results overnight. "This can't be," Amelia muttered to herself, repeatedly checking the lab report for any possible errors. She even called the lab director in person to confirm the accuracy of the results. "Dr. Brown, I've had it checked 3 times, said Jenkins, the lab director, with an unconcealed surprise in his voice. "This is indeed Sophia Williams' blood sample. In fact, I was about to call you. This improvement. I've never seen it. Are there any new experimental treatments you've used?" Amelia's throat tightened. "No, it's just routine care." She couldn't tell Jenkins about Apollo, at least not yet. As soon as she hung up, Amelia scheduled a full imaging test. 2 hours later, the results of a CT scan and bone marrow aspirate showed that the cancer cells in Sophia's body were indeed decreasing and that new healthy cells were forming. There is little precedent for this reversal in the medical literature. By lunchtime, the hospital hallways were already filled with whispers about the miracle girl. The nurses reported that Sophia was not only able to sit up, but also ate a full breakfast, something that had never happened in the past month. Amelia returns to Sophia's hospital room to find the little girl talking to her parents, while Apollo is still lying quietly at the foot of the bed, as if it had always belonged there. The Williams looked ecstatic and bewildered, their eyes glinting with hope but also with bewilderment at the sudden turnaround. "Dr. Brown, what's going on?" Robert Williams asked, his voice trembling with excitement. "Yesterday you told us to prepare for the worst, and today," his voice choked. Amelia took a deep breath. "We're doing a full checkup, but Sophia does show significant improvement." She hesitated, then pointed to Apollo. "About this dog. Do you know how it came about?" The Williams looked at each other in confusion. "What dog?" Maria Williams asked. "We didn't bring any animals to the hospital." Amelia felt a chill creep up her spine. The Williams seemed to be completely invisible to Apollo, even though it is there, huge enough to be ignored. She looked at Sophia, and the little girl was smiling at her, as if understanding her confusion. "Only special people can see Apollo," Sophia whispered, "he told me." Just then, Dr. Hamilton, the director of the hospital, walked into the room, followed by Dr. Levinson, the head of the oncology department. They all heard about Sophia's miraculous recovery, and couldn't wait to see it for themselves. "Dr. Brown, this is incredible," Hamilton said excitedly. completely unaware of Apollo at the foot of the bed. We need to immediately organize a medical team to study this case. This could be a groundbreaking discovery. Amelia's gaze moves back and forth between Apollo and the others, and she suddenly realizes a startling fact. It seems that only she and Sophia can see the mysterious creature. The realization made her feel dizzy, and the line between the scientific and the supernatural began to blur in her perception. While the doctors excitedly discussed Sophia's recovery and possible scientific explanations, Apollo stood up quietly and walked over to Amelia. Its green eyes stared directly at her, as if to convey some kind of silent message. Amelia felt a strange urge to touch it and confirm that its presence was not a hallucination. When her fingers touched Apollo's fur, a series of images suddenly flashed through her mind: cardinals in the snow, ancient forests, countless children like Sophia, and, most disturbing of all, slices of Sophia's future life, as she grew up, healthy and happy, as if leukemia had never existed. Amelia jerked back her hand and took a step back in shock. No one noticed her unusual reaction, and they were all busy examining Sophia and discussing this medical miracle. "We need to publish this case," Dr. Levinson said fervently, "which could change our entire understanding of childhood leukemia treatment." Amelia looked at Apollo, who watched her silently, as if waiting for her decision. She suddenly understood the choice she was facing. She could attribute Sophia's recovery to unknown medical factors, earning professional reputation and scientific recognition, or she can admit that there are things that are beyond the scope of scientific explanation, risking being ridiculed by her peers. "I need more time to observe," Amelia finally said, her voice more determined than she expected. "I want to make sure that this improvement is lasting before we draw any conclusions." Hamilton and Levinson looked a little disappointed, but they respected her decision as the attending doctor. When they left the ward, Amelia stayed behind, alone with Apollo and Sophia. "You know what it is, right?" Sophia asked, with wisdom in her voice that transcended her years. Amelia shook her head. "I don't know, Sophia. But I want to find out." Apollo whimpered softly and walked to the window of the hospital room. Outside the window, the cardinal reappeared, perched on the windowsill, its bright red feathers glistening in the sun. Apollo and Cardinal looked at each other for a moment, as if they were communicating silently. Amelia feels like she is standing at the crossroads of two worlds, one of science and logic that she is familiar with, and the other of which is full of mysteries and unexplainable phenomena. Sophia's life seems to be hanging between these two worlds. At this moment, Sophia's monitoring instruments suddenly emitted a piercing siren. The little girl's eyes rolled and her body began to twitch violently. Amelia immediately rushed to the side of the bed and pressed the emergency call button. "Code Blue. ICU Room 5. She shouted, starting the emergency treatment procedure. Paramedics quickly flooded the room, and the Williams were invited to wait in the hallway. In the confusion, no one noticed that Apollo had disappeared, only the cardinal remained on the windowsill, quietly watching it all. Amelia's heart raced, and fear and confusion filled her mind. Just a few minutes ago, Sophia was acting so well, and now she is in danger again. What's going on? Where did Apollo go? How does its appearance and disappearance relate to Sophia's condition? In the midst of a tense moment of rescuing Sophia, Amelia suddenly realizes that she is facing the biggest challenge of her career, not only medically, but also against her entire worldview. And Sophia's fate seems to be in the hands of a force that she cannot understand. 3 days later, the hospital's Christmas tree had been decorated and the hall was filled with festive music. Amelia stood in front of Sophia's hospital room window, looking out at the falling snowflakes. That sudden crisis has passed, and the little girl has stabilized again, and miraculously continues to get better. Blood tests showed that the cancer cells were decreasing and her immune system was gradually recovering. Apollo hasn't been seen since that crisis. Sometimes Amelia wonders if the mysterious dog really existed, but whenever that thought comes up, a cardinal stops on the windowsill, as if to remind her that those incredible moments did happen. Dr. Brown, Sophia's voice pulled her back to reality. Will Apollo come back? Amelia turned to face the little girl. Sophia's cheeks had regained some blood, and her eyes had rekindled the light of life. She sat up on the bed and was drawing a picture of a big gray dog and a small red bird, standing in the snow. I don't know, darling, Amelia replied honestly, but I think he's done his job. Sophia nodded, as if she fully understood. He told me he had to help the other children. But he said the cardinals would stay and watch me. Amelia felt her throat tighten. She has given up on explaining everything that happened with science. Over the past few days, she has consulted countless sources of material about Celtic mythology, legends about greyhounds and healers. In some old Irish tales, there are references to mysterious creatures that can cross the line between life and death, sometimes appearing in the form of large dogs, guarding those who hover on the edge of life and death. You know, Sophia, Amelia whispered, sitting on the edge of the bed, sometimes the wonders of the world are beyond our comprehension. As doctors, we always seek scientific explanations, but some things. Perhaps no explanation is needed. Sophia smiled. Apollo said you are special because you believe in both science and the unseen. Amelia felt her eyes moisten. She remembered the little girl she had lost in Afghanistan and the stray dog that had appeared outside the hospital that night. Perhaps that was the first time Apollo met her, and she didn't recognize it at the time. There was a knock at the door, and Director Hamilton walked in, with an excited look on his face. Dr. Brown, Sophia's latest test results are in, he announced, and the leukemia cells are almost completely gone. It's simply, I don't know how to describe it. A medical miracle. Amelia smiled and glanced at the cardinal on the windowsill. Yes, it is indeed a miracle in a sense. We need you to write a detailed case report, Hamilton continued, and the medical community needs to understand this unprecedented spontaneous remission. Do you have any theories? Amelia was silent for a moment, thinking about how to answer. She looked at Sophia, and the little girl winked at her. I think, Amelia finally says, that there are cures that are beyond our current scientific understanding. Maybe in the future we will find an explanation, but for now, we should accept this gift and continue to learn and explore. Hamilton looked a little confused, but he nodded. Well, anyway, it's good news to celebrate. The Williams family can go home before Christmas. When Hamilton leaves, Amelia helps Sophia pack up her painting tools. Would you tell someone about Apollo? Sophia asked. Amelia shook her head. Some stories are only meant to be kept in the heart, at least for now. But maybe one day, when the world is ready, I'll tell this story. A week later, Christmas Eve. Sophia has been discharged home, and the corridors of the hospital are decorated with festive lights. Amelia finished her shift and walked to the parking lot. The snow began to fall again, covering the whole world quietly. As she walked to her car, she noticed a vague figure standing not far away, a large gray canine with green eyes twinkling in the darkness. It only appeared for a split second and then disappeared into the snow, but Amelia knew it was Apollo. She smiled and looked up at the night sky, stars looming among the clouds. She doesn't know what Apollo is or why it chose to help Sophia, but she knows that there are miracles and mysteries in the world that cannot be explained by science. As a doctor, her duty is to cure diseases, but as a person, she has also learned to accept things that are beyond comprehension and make room for them. In her pocket, there is a Christmas gift given to her by Sophia, a painting of Apollo and cardinals, with a hospital window in the background, in which is a smiling little girl and a doctor. On the back of the painting are written a few simple words, for those who can see miracles. As Amelia drove away from the hospital, a cardinal flew through her windshield, leaving a bright red trail in the snow, as if to remind her that hope would never die, as long as we were willing to believe. Dear readers, this is the end of the story of Apollo and the cardinal. The story explores the balance between science and faith, reason and mystery, reminding us that sometimes the most beautiful things in the world are miracles that cannot be fully explained. If this story touches your heartstrings, please give it a thumbs up. Every like you has is the motivation for the author to continue creating. How do you feel about the story? What exactly is Apollo? Did Dr. Amelia make the right choice? Feel free to share your thoughts and interpretations in the comments section. If you think this story deserves to be seen by more people, please forward it to your friends. In this cold winter, let us pass on the power of warmth and hope together. Looking forward to meeting you again in the next story.